The sun beat down on the dusty main street of Redemption, Arizona Territory, in 1879. It was a heat that sank into your bones, much like the weariness that settled deep within Sheriff Caleb Mercer. His eyes, usually sharp and watchful, held a tired glaze as he watched a tumbleweed bounce lazily across the road. For 10 long years, he'd worn the star, chasing down outlaws and bringing a rough kind of justice to this wild land. Each notch on his belt, each face he'd brought to the hangman's noose, had chipped away a little piece of him. He wasn't a young man anymore, and the thrill of the chase had long since been replaced by a heavy sense of duty. His office, a small, cramped room with a perpetually creaking door, offered little comfort. The wanted posters tacked to the wall seemed to mock him with their endless parade of grinning villains. He'd seen too many good men die, too many families broken by the lawless nature of the frontier. He'd even been the instrument of that brokenness himself, though he tried not to dwell on it. A deep sigh escaped his lips, stirring the dust motes dancing in the sliver of light from the grimy window. His hat, a worn Stetson, lay on his desk, its brim soft from countless hours of handling. Caleb picked it up, running a thumb over the faded leather. He felt as old and as worn as the hat itself. Just yesterday, he'd ridden back from a 3-day pursuit, the dust still clinging to his clothes and the taste of grit still in his mouth. He'd caught his man, of course. Caleb always did, but the victory felt hollow like all the others. He looked out the window again, his gaze falling on the general store, then the saloon, then the empty lot where the new church was supposed to be built. Redemption was a town trying to be something more, but the shadows of the past and the constant threat of the untamed land always seemed to linger. He wondered if he could ever truly find peace here, or if his life would always be a relentless ride from one confrontation to the next. The creak of the office door pulled Caleb from his tired thoughts. Standing there, framed by the afternoon sun, was a woman he recognized, though time and hardship had etched new lines on her face. Rachel Boone, his gut twisted. He remembered the day he tracked down her husband, Selah's, a man who'd made his living by taking what wasn't his. Caleb had done his duty, and Selah's Boone had met his end. Now his widow stood before him, a small, quiet boy clinging to her skirt. "Sheriff Mercer," Rachel's voice was soft, barely a whisper, yet it carried the weight of 1,000 sorrows. I have nowhere else to go." All that. Caleb's gaze softened despite himself. He saw the dust on her worn dress, the hollow look in her eyes, the way she clutched her son as if he were the last thing she had in the world. And indeed, he probably was. Selah's had left her with nothing but a bad name and a child. The law had been clear, the justice served. But looking at Rachel, Caleb felt a different kind of burden. He'd taken her husband's life, even if Selah's had brought it upon himself. A debt not of law, but of a deeper human kind, settled on Caleb's shoulders. "Come in, Mrs. Boone," he said, his voice gruff but not unkind. He pushed a stack of papers aside, clearing a space on a worn wooden chair. The boy, perhaps 4 or 5 years old, hid his face in Rachel's side, his small form trembling slightly. Caleb noted the child's silence, a quietness that seemed to echo Rachel's own. "You can't stay on the road," Caleb continued, already making up his mind. "There's an old shed out back used for storage. It's not much, but it'll keep the rain off. You can clean it out, make it livable for now." He saw the flicker of surprise, then a hesitant gratitude in Rachel's eyes. "I'll find some work for you, too, something honest. The town needs a laundress, and Mrs. Gable at the general store could use help with mending." He tried to sound firm, like he was just doing his job, but a quiet resolve settled in his heart. He'd brought her husband to his end. The least he could do was offer the widow and her child a chance. The news of Rachel Boone and her son staying in Sheriff Mercer's shed spread through Redemption like wildfire. It wasn't long before the whispers started. Mrs. Gable, usually so kind, pursed her lips when Rachel came in to ask about mending work. "She's Selah's Boone's widow," she'd mutter to anyone within earshot, her voice low but sharp. "That man was a thief and worse. What kind of woman marries such a scoundrel?" Children, usually boisterous and playful, would fall silent when Rachel walked by, their eyes wide and curious, echoing the unspoken judgments of their parents. Their mothers would pull them closer, as if Rachel's presence carried a stain that could spread. At the general store, conversations would halt abruptly when she entered, only to resume in hushed tones once she had passed. Rachel felt their stares, heavy and cold, burning holes in her back. She kept her head down, her cheeks flushing with shame, even though she knew she had done no wrong. She had tried to make Silas change, had begged him to give up his outlaw ways, but her pleas had fallen on deaf ears. Now she was paying the price for his choices. Even Caleb, usually respected and feared, wasn't immune to the town's disapproval. Old Man Hemlock, who ran the livery stable, spit tobacco juice near Caleb's boots one afternoon. "Sheriff," he drawled, his eyes narrowed, "taking in stray cats is one thing, but a snake's kin. That ain't right, you're bringing bad luck into redemption." Caleb had simply stared at him, his gaze unwavering, until Hemlock shifted uncomfortably and turned away. He heard the murmurs when he walked down the street, felt the chill in the air when he tried to speak to folks about anything other than law and order. Some even grumbled about his judgment, questioning why the upright sheriff would help the wife of a man he himself had put in the ground. But Caleb stood firm. He had given his word, and a sense of fairness, deeper than any town gossip, told him it was the right thing to do. Rachel and her silent son needed a chance, and he was determined to give it to them, no matter what the town thought. Despite the cold shoulders and sharp words from the townsfolk, Caleb didn't waver. He had made a promise not just to Rachel, but to himself. He knew what was right, and gossip wouldn't change that. The old storage shed behind the jailhouse became Rachel and her son's new home. It was small, with a dirt floor and a single grimy window, but Caleb made sure it was dry and had a sturdy roof. He even brought over an old cot and a patched quilt from his own sparse belongings. He also kept his word about work. He spoke to Mrs. Gable again, this time with a firm tone that left no room for argument. "Rachel Boone is a hardworking woman, Mrs. Gable. She needs to earn her keep, and you need a good laundress. It's settled." Mrs. Gable, though still tight-lipped, knew better than to argue with the sheriff when his mind was made up. So Rachel began taking in laundry, scrubbing clothes by hand in large tubs outside the shed, the steam rising in the cool morning air. He also found her tasks at the general store, sweeping floors and mending torn fabrics. The pay was meager, but it was honest, and it meant she could buy flour and beans. Caleb made sure the shed was always stocked with firewood for the small stove he'd installed, and he often left a sack of potatoes or a few eggs on her doorstep without a word. He didn't do it for thanks. He did it because he knew what it was like to be alone, to feel the harshness of the world. Rachel, for her part, worked tirelessly, her small son always nearby, watching with wide, silent eyes. She cleaned the shed until it gleamed, patching the cot and making it into a proper home, meager as it was. Caleb saw her determination, her quiet strength, and it only solidified his resolve to stand by his decision, no matter how much the town grumbled. He wasn't just giving her shelter, he was giving her a chance to rebuild, a chance he felt she deserved. Rachel worked hard, her hands often raw from scrubbing and mending, but the shame clung to her like the dust of the Arizona roads. Every glance, every hushed word from the townspeople felt like a fresh wound. She often wondered if Silas's bad deeds truly had tainted her, if she carried a mark that everyone else could see. She longed for a friendly face, a kind word, but they rarely came. Her only comfort was her son, a small, quiet boy she called Little Silas, though she never spoke the name aloud. He was a good boy, always close by her side, his large, serious eyes watching the world. But he had never spoken a word, not mama, not papa, not even a simple babble. Rachel had tried everything she knew, singing lullabies, pointing out birds in the sky, coaxing him with toys. But his lips remained sealed, his silence a constant worry in her heart. Sometimes, when the town's judgment felt too heavy, she wondered if his silence was another one of Silas's burdens, passed down to their innocent child. It made her feel even more alone, more ashamed. She would sit in the evenings in the dim light of the shed, patching clothes by the glow of a single lamp, Little Silas curled up beside her. She would tell him stories, her voice a soft murmur in the quiet room, hoping that one day a word, any word, would break free. She'd whisper about the good things in the world, the bright flowers, the swift deer, trying to fill his quiet world with sound. But he would just listen, his eyes unblinking, never making a sound. The weight of his silence, combined with the town's coldness, often brought tears to Rachel's eyes, tears she quickly wiped away before her son could see. She had to be strong for him, even when her heart felt like it might break under the heavy load of shame and worry. She was his mother, his only protector, and she would not let him down. One afternoon, Caleb noticed a wobbly old rocking chair sitting outside Rachel's shed. Its back was broken, and one of its runners was cracked. It had clearly seen better days, probably discarded by some family in town. He watched Rachel try to rock little Sela's in it, the chair groaning and swaying precariously. The sight stirred something in him. Later that evening, after his duties were done, Caleb brought his tools over. Without a word, he set about repairing the chair. He planed new wood for the runner, hammered in fresh nails, and braced the back until it was sturdy again. Rachel watched him, her eyes wide, but still she said nothing. When he finished, he simply nodded, wiped his hands on his trousers, and went back to his office. The next morning, Rachel found a warm loaf of cornbread on her doorstep, still steaming. Caleb had baked it himself, a rare treat he usually only made for special occasions. It was a simple offering, but it spoke volumes. Rachel cut a slice for little Silas, who ate it with a quiet eagerness she hadn't seen in him for a while. That night, for the first time, Rachel sat in the repaired rocking chair, gently swaying with her son in her arms, a small, tentative smile touching her lips. These small kindnesses, quietly given without expectation, began to chip away at the wall Rachel had built around her heart. Caleb didn't talk about her past, didn't look at her with judgment, just offered practical help and a steady, silent presence. Sometimes he'd see little Silas watching him as he went about his work, a flicker of something curious in his eyes. Caleb would just offer a small nod or a gentle wave. Slowly, almost without realizing it, Rachel started to trust him. She still kept her distance, still carried her shame, but a tiny seed of hope, watered by Caleb's quiet generosity, began to grow in the barren landscape of her life. She realized he was different from the harsh world she knew, a steady light in the darkness. Weeks turned into months. Caleb continued his rounds, the badge feeling heavier with each passing day. Another posse was forming tonight. A gang of rustlers had been spotted north of town. He was pulling on his heavy coat, strapping on his gun belt, the familiar weight a comfort and a burden all at once. The moon was a sliver in the dark sky, casting long shadows. He stepped out of his office, the cold night air biting at his cheeks. As he moved towards his horse, tied to the hitching post, he noticed a small figure standing outside Rachel's shed. It was little Silas, wrapped in a blanket, his mother likely asleep inside. The boy often watched him, his silent gaze unwavering. Caleb paused, a small, tired smile touching his lips. He was used to the boy's quiet presence, a small, watchful shadow. He took another step, then another. Suddenly, a small tug on his coat stopped him short. He looked down. Little Silas, his face barely visible in the dim light, had reached out and grabbed a fold of his heavy wool coat. The boy's eyes, usually so still, were wide and bright. Caleb knelt down, concern creasing his brow. "Everything all right, son?" he asked softly, his voice rougher than usual from the cold. Little Silas stared up at him, his small hand still clinging to the fabric. Then a sound so faint it was almost a breath escaped his lips. It was a single, raw, perfect syllable. "Pa." Caleb froze, the word hung in the cold night air, impossibly clear. He looked at the boy, then around, as if searching for a hidden trick. But there was only the quiet desert night, and the small boy looking up at him with newfound wonder in his eyes. Rachel's son, the boy who had never spoken. He had just called Caleb Pa. A shock went through Caleb, deeper than any bullet wound or broken bone he'd ever endured. It wasn't just a word, it was a bridge built from all the quiet kindnesses, all the unspoken moments of connection. It shattered something within him, something he hadn't realized was holding him together, yet also holding him back. The badge on his chest suddenly felt heavier than lead, and the call of the open trail seemed to fade into a distant, unimportant hum. His heart, long hardened by duty and loneliness, cracked open. The word echoed in Caleb's mind. Pa, it wasn't just a sound. It was a warm, bright spark in the cold, dark world he had known for so long. He looked at little Silas, who was now smiling up at him, a genuine, shy smile that transformed his usually serious face. It was a smile Caleb had never seen before, not on this boy, not truly on anyone in years. In that moment, everything shifted. The rustlers north of town, the endless chases, the grim duty of the badge, it all faded into the background, losing its sharp edges. For so long, Caleb's life had been about righting wrongs, bringing order to chaos, but always from a distance, always alone. He'd been a protector, a judge, but never truly a part of anything, never a asterisk pa asterisk. A wave of emotion, powerful and unfamiliar, washed over him. It was a mix of tenderness, fierce protectiveness, and a profound, aching longing he hadn't known he possessed. The weariness that had settled in his bones for years suddenly felt unbearable. He didn't want to ride out into the cold night to chase shadows anymore. He didn't want to live his life for the star on his chest, for the town that judged and whispered. He wanted to live for this moment, for this small, brave boy who had chosen him. He looked down at his gun belt, at the heavy Colt in its holster, at the shiny badge. It no longer felt like a symbol of purpose but a chain, binding him to a life he no longer desired. He had always believed his path was set, that he was destined to be the law, nothing more. But little Silas's single word had cracked open that belief, revealing a different, brighter path. He could almost feel the warmth of a home, the soft comfort of a family, a life where he was needed for more than just his gun. The choice was clear, even if it meant turning his back on everything he had ever been. He couldn't go on this ride. He couldn't keep living for the badge. Caleb knelt there in the dust, little Silas still looking up at him with that miraculous new smile. The posse, the rustlers, the very idea of riding out into the night, all of it seemed foolish and distant. He carefully reached up and unpinned the tarnished silver star from his chest. It made a soft, metallic click as it came loose. The weight of it, so familiar for a decade, suddenly felt foreign in his palm. It wasn't just metal. It was a symbol of the lonely path he'd walked, the cold, hard choices he'd made. He held the star for a moment, glinting dully in the moonlight, then placed it gently on the ground beside him. It lay there, a small, quiet declaration of a changed heart. Just then, Rachel appeared at the door of the shed, drawn by the sound of voices, or perhaps by some mother's instinct. Her eyes, usually shadowed with worry, widened when she saw Caleb on his knees and the star on the ground. She saw the raw emotion on his face, the tender way he looked at her son. Little Silas, still beaming, pointed a tiny finger at the discarded star, then back at Caleb and then at Rachel. He made a soft, happy sound, a new sound like a bird chirping. Rachel walked slowly towards them, her gaze moving from the star to Caleb to her son. The shame she had carried for so long, the coldness of the town, all seemed to melt away in the warmth of this unexpected moment. She reached down, her hand trembling slightly, and placed it over Caleb's hand, which was still resting on the ground near the star. Her touch was soft, hesitant, but firm. It was a silent promise, a shared understanding that needed no words. Caleb looked up at her, and in her eyes he saw not judgment but acceptance, and a hope he hadn't dared to dream of. The chill of the Arizona night faded, replaced by a warmth that spread through him, right down to his weary bones. With Rachel's hand warm over his, Caleb felt a peace he hadn't known in years. He looked from her to little Silas, whose small hand now reached out to touch the fallen star, a curious frown on his brow. The badge, once the core of Caleb's identity, now lay there, a discarded piece of metal. He had traded it for something infinitely more valuable, a future, a family. The next morning, the posse rode out without Sheriff Mercer. The town buzzed with confusion and speculation when they learned he had resigned. Some were angry, some relieved, but Caleb paid them no mind. He spent the day in his office, not cleaning guns or filling out reports, but gathering his few belongings. He left a note for the town council, short and to the point. "My service to redemption is done. Find a new lawman." He moved into the little shed behind the jail, making it his home alongside Rachel and little Sela's. It was a tight squeeze, but it was filled with a quiet warmth that his old, empty office had never known. Caleb found work as a carpenter. His strong hands, once used for gripping a gun, now shaped wood into sturdy tables and chairs. He taught little Silas how to hammer nails, how to smooth rough edges, and the boy, no longer silent, would babble and point, sometimes even repeating words Caleb said. Rachel continued her laundry and mending, but now she did it with a lighter heart, a small smile often on her face. The town's whispers slowly faded, replaced by the simple sight of a man, a woman, and a boy building a life together. Caleb, Rachel, and little Silas were a family, not by blood but by choice, by kindness, and by a love that had blossomed in the dust of the Arizona Territory. Their days were simple, filled with honest work, shared meals, and the growing sounds of a boy who had found his voice, and a man who had found his home.